Good morning, afternoon, or evening. How y'all doing today? Welcome back to Mr. Morrow's Intensive Math class. Today we're going to be talking about integer operations. And with integer operations, my friends, we must realize that when numbers and or variables are being combined via plus or minus signs, they are always being added. Therefore, there are some rules which allow you to use the negative sign correctly. But in order to understand these rules, we first have to understand the definition of absolute value. Absolute value is the distance from zero. Absolute value is always positive since it's a distance, and is represented by this symbol that you see here. Looks like two straight lines. That's what absolute value looks like. So, rule number one. When the signs are the same, simply add the given values and keep the sign. So for example, 4 and 7 are both the same sign, so that answer would be 4 plus 7 is positive 11. You have a negative 8 plus a negative 5, the signs are the same, so that's negative 13. You have a negative 2 minus 7. The sign of the 2 is negative, the sign of the 7 is negative, so you add and keep the sign, negative 9. 8 plus 19. The sign of the 8 is positive, the sign of the 19 is positive, so you add and keep the sign, 27. You have negative 6 minus 12. The sign of the 6 is negative, the sign of the 12 is negative, so you simply add and keep the sign. So when the signs are the same, simply add and keep the same sign. Second one. When the signs are different or opposite, one's positive, one's negative, you simply subtract as normal. What do I mean by subtract as normal? It's the large value minus the small value. And keep the sign of the largest absolute value. So when the signs are different or opposite, simply subtract as normal, large minus small, and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. So 4 minus 6. The sign of the 4 is positive, the sign of the 6 is negative. So 6 minus 4 is 2, but my answer is negative 2 because there are more negatives than positives. 6 minus 11. The sign of the 6 is positive, the sign of the 11 is negative. Subtract as normal. So 11 minus 6 is 5, but there are more negatives than positives, so that's negative 5. C. 8 minus 5. The sign of the 8 is positive, the sign of the 5 is negative. You subtract as normal, keep the sign of the largest absolute value, so you would have a positive 3 here, because there are more positives than negatives. 11 minus 20. The sign of the 11 is positive, the sign of the 20 is negative. So you subtract as normal, 20 minus 11 is 9, but there are more negatives than positives, so negative 9 would be my answer. 16 minus 10. Positive 16, and you have the 10, which is a negative. So the signs are opposite. You subtract as normal and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. 16 minus 10 is 6, and it's positive 6 because there are more positives than negatives. Now, a special case. When you are subtracting a negative number, the two negatives multiply together and become addition. What do I mean by subtracting a negative? I mean this. If I have a negative times a negative 5, this negative right here is really a negative 1. And a negative 1 times a negative 5 becomes a positive 5. So when you see a negative times a negative, simply combine those two negatives by multiplication and make it a positive. For example, A. I have negative 6 minus a negative 15. So this is negative 6. Negative times a negative becomes positive 15. Negative 6 plus 15 is positive 9. They're opposite signs, so you subtract as normal. Keep the sign of the largest absolute value. 8 minus a negative 3 becomes 8 plus 3. 8 plus 3 is 11. Because this, not 10, but 11. Sorry about that. It's 11 because the signs are the same, so you add and keep the sign. 12 minus a negative 9. We have a 12 Negative times a negative here becomes positive 9. 12 plus 9, the signs are the same, so you add and keep the sign. I have a negative 7 minus a negative 7. So I have a negative 7. Negative times a negative is a positive 7. The signs are opposite, so you subtract as normal. 7 minus 7 would be 0. And 0 is neither positive nor negative. It's just 0. And last but not least, I have a 14 minus a negative 4, which becomes a plus 4. 14 plus 4, the signs are the same, so you add and keep the sign. So it would be positive 18. Excellent, sir. Now, rules for integer operations, multiplication, and division. The good news, the rules are the same, okay? The rules for multiplication and division are the same. A negative times a negative is a positive. So negative 3 times negative 2 is positive 6. A negative times a positive is a negative. So negative 3 times positive 2 is a negative 6. A positive times a positive is a positive. So positive 4 times positive 5 is positive 20. The rules for the division are the same. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. So negative 10 divided by negative 5 is a positive 2. A negative divided by a positive is a negative. So negative 10 divided by a positive 5 is a negative 2. And vice versa, guys. If I have a positive divided by a negative, that also equals a negative, okay? So if I had 10 divided by a negative 5, that would also equal negative 2, okay? And a positive divided by a positive is a positive. Positive 10 divided by positive 5 will be a positive 2. So a negative times a negative, or a negative divided by a negative, is a positive. Good. A negative times a positive, or a negative divided by a positive, is a negative. Good. A positive times a positive, or a positive divided by a positive, is a positive. Guys, positive times a positive, or a positive divided by a positive will be positive. Excellent. Now let's just practice. 8 minus 12. Signs are opposite, so you subtract and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. So this would be 12 minus 8 is 4, but there's more negatives, so it'd be negative 4. Excellent. Negative 12 minus a negative 5. You have a negative 12 plus 5. It wouldn't be 7, it would be negative 7, because the signs are opposite, so you subtract as normal and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. Negative 2 times negative 5 times positive 5 would be negative 10, because a negative times a positive is a negative. Excellent. Negative 8 times negative 3 would be positive 24, because a negative times a negative is a positive. Negative 20 divided by positive 5 is a negative 4. Good. Excellent. Because a negative divided by a positive is a negative. And 48 divided by negative 16 would be a negative 3. Excellent. Because a positive divided by a negative is a negative. Thank you very much. I hope you learned a lot and have a great day.